Hey YouTube, this is Nordic Brit. So if you haven't been watching any of my videos in the last few weeks, or you haven't been following the news regarding the stock market and the kind of stability of the economy, then you probably haven't been doing anything, I guess, because it's been really hard to avoid that regarding the whole GameStop stuff, the Wall Street, the economy, inflation, printing loads of money, blah, blah, blah. It's been a load of stuff. And the last few videos that I've posted have been, looking at this and kind of being like, right, something is going to happen soon. It cannot continue this way. There are too many unknowns. There's too much instability. The market has to crash at some point because it's a bubble and it's a bull run and blah, blah, blah. And if you watch a lot of videos, it's going to be like that. However, there is another side of the economy that people are not talking about a lot, which is really concerning. If you're not into economics and stuff like that, then it's really easy to miss this, to be honest. But basically, you have the stock market and then you have the bond market. Now, it's a market that, for most people is considered quite boring. But the only thing you need to understand about the bond market is that companies, it's pretty much always companies, are essentially giving bonds, IOUs really, to debt. They basically take out loans rather than use their own money. And when there is really low interest rate, which is when the government tends to lower the interest rate to try to help stimulate an economy that's already kind of screwed and slowing down, greedy companies and badly mismanaged companies will use this opportunity to just issue IOUs. Now, that is obviously a problem if these companies are not stable later. And since we're going through a kind of stock market up and down and, eventually it's going to burst at some point, what will happen is that this will probably end up getting revealed a lot more. So you're going to end up with this bond market coming in. Now, the current debt of just American companies, okay, is almost $11 trillion in bond debt, basically debt that is they promise that they will pay. So this is not like stocks or anything. This is basically them taking out a loan in a similar way that you would take out a mortgage or something like that. Now, in the last few months, there are several companies, including big companies like Heinz and Ford, that are now considered junk bonds. Basically, investors and other analysts have looked at these companies and said, yeah, we don't think they can pay back these debts. Now, if a stock market crash were to happen because the prices actually decide to realign with reality, could trigger huge problems for the bond market, or the bond market could trigger huge problems for the stock market, because everything's really on a knife edge right now. So if you're worried about a stock collapse or you're worried about a market crash, it might be just that you're worried about a particular collapse of a stock, but the actual collapse of the economy can come from other places. And the bond market is an area which have woefully unregulated for quite a long time. And it's now standing at, the exact figures are roughly around $10.5 trillion. Now, there's lots of companies who borrow money who will be able to pay it back. But that's not the point, because if a few companies are now rated as junk stock, basically, and junk, they can't pay it back, what's going to happen is that those companies will eventually kind of collapse or go on a run. Basically, their stock price will drop, which will trigger scaring, and investors kind of react in a way where, if a few companies drop, then they think, okay, this must be the big one. And then everyone starts pulling their stocks and things move around too much, and that triggers a collapse. So the fact that the stock market price might go up or down might be like, okay, the prices are correcting, it's all good. But if the bond market isn't actually solved at some point and companies don't stop borrowing money, and eventually a company gets to a certain date, because what's normally happened with these bonds is that they issue it and say, okay, in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year or 20 years, we'll pay back the bond plus a bit of interest. That's how people make money on it. And if they can't meet those payments, they will go insolvent. They will go bankrupt. And if a company like Ford, for example, which is already considered junk, cannot pay back its current debts, it won't be able to borrow more money to pay back the current debts it owes, it will go into bankruptcy in a similar way that we do as people. When we can't afford, say, a mortgage payment or loan payments, you have to refinance. But, it's hard to refinance your personal loans if you're already considered a risk. So, it gets worse and worse. You have to consider the bond market. The way that people tend to buy bonds and how much they trust a company to pay it back works the same way as our credit rating does for individual people. You have good bonds and you've got bad bonds, which are normally just called junk. And so when you've got companies like Ford, that's a company with loads of employees and lots of R&D and lots of development and factories, and that's a big company that can trigger some kind of collapse. So if you're worried about the stock market, you should be. If you're worried about a collapse, you should be. The combination of the pandemic, the crazy Wall Street stuff going on right now, and the bond market, it's something to really consider. I'm actually going to post a link to a video basically which discusses this a little bit more. And this is not some like random tucked away on some Reddit forum or something like that. This is CNN reporting about this, saying this is a problem. It's when you've got big news outlets talking about this, then you have to know that something is going to come on the cards at some point soon. So just be prepared for that. Keep an eye on the market. If you've got investments, then of course, it's always risky, but follow that. But as for in a prepping circle and the stock collapse or the economic collapse, that could be quite bad. And that's something that I'm watching really closely. So stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Nordic Brit out.